All right, so the recording is on, and this is Maya Dynamics 2, week 1. This is the first time we do this on the open source project. It's the first class of this level. For those of you watching the previous lesson on level 1, Maya 1, and if you're going to follow this ones every week, you're going to see my voice is going to be decaying more and more and more. By the time I reach real flow, 2 hours and a half from now, hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'm drinking my water as I'm teaching, so we'll see how it goes. So, I already explained to my guys here, I'm hoping that we'll ask plenty of questions for everyone to see. And let's go ahead and start then. I'm already sharing this. I'm going to minimize my window and jump back into Maya. So this is level 2, okay? I have some of the participants of this class live, Claude and Ellie, were my students on level 1, okay, and then just continuing the course, so you guys are a bit more familiar with how everything works and how I work on Maya. I'm gonna do this probably only on the first lesson of every level, just to be clear. Some people might not watch it all. I just repeat myself a little, but I'm gonna say that the way that I'm gonna show these effects, okay, is not by all means, okay, it's a bit of a disclaimer, is not the only way to do an effect. I'm not claiming to be the best way either, okay? It's something that I myself picked up over the years, okay? I've been using Maya for at least 13 years. I've been working professionally in the film industry for about 10 years of those. But in between things, I have done music videos, medical visualizations, forensic work, you name it, commercials, freelancing, web graphics, you name it. Everything probably out there, I've done it, okay? So, I managed to collect a lot of experience, a lot of tricks and things, and I tend to shortcut my classes, and I try to, make sure that I compress all the information that I think you should really be getting from me, as opposed to getting from another tutorial, a book, or just practicing. Things that I think is best if I tell you, then you're probably not going to find somewhere there, right? So I'm going to try to do that. The questions that you will be asking me are, very important for the way this course is going to be progressing over the weeks. I do have obviously a very clear program to follow, but that is subject to change, okay, if necessary. So that's just a bit of a disclaimer, okay? So let's go ahead and start. So the level 1, okay, is based mostly on particles, okay? We go and cover a lot of particle techniques and goals and soft bodies and particle emission, particle motion. By the time we reach level 2, I assume that you're very comfortable with this, okay, with all those topics, okay? And what I like to do is what to me is as important probably as the particles and the core foundations of dynamics, which is the fluids, Maya fluids, okay? By fluids, I don't mean liquid. By fluids, I mean volumetrics, okay? Smoke, fire, steam, and things like that, okay? So I'm going to show you I'm going to take probably 75% of this course and spend it only on fluids, okay? And I'm going to leave the last bit to talk about end particles and probably end cloth a little. You will see the reason I do that is because by now I'm expecting for you to know how to move particles around, and by the time I give you the end particles, okay, the analogy is always the same. So you're driving in a Camry, okay, before, and then you learn how to drive. It's a stick shift. The car brakes every now and then. It's a bit painful to move around. It's very cheap. You can just put barely any gas in it, and then all of a sudden you get a brand new pimped out Mercedes with all these buttons and fancy things. At the same time, it's more expensive to run. Okay, it's nicer. There's less things to do. It's only all these automatic things happening for you, but it's more expensive to run, and at the same time it gets you from point A to point B. So the result is pretty similar, right? I find that analogy to be working really well for particles and end particles. Okay? Whatever you know from particles is going to be on end particles, plus other extra topics here and there, and just shortcuts to get your life a bit easier. But it's definitely more expensive to calculate. So I'm going to leave that towards the end. That's mostly because the way I work with my live sessions, okay? If you're taking this as a recording, then you will probably, if you don't feel confident enough to be following along with what I'm doing, or what I'm going to be doing, probably, step back, watch level 1, make sure you understand it, and you will get a lot more out of this one, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and start doing some fluids. I'm expecting, hopefully you guys on the live session are typing a little bit about yourself, so I can get a bit of a better idea or your Maya skills, okay? I'm going to assume because this is for everybody. Okay, I'm going to try to cover the core parts first. Okay, so we're still working on the dynamics menu, still meaning that from level 1, okay, we set it up already to the dynamics menu. So the fluid section is right next to the particles, and what I'm going to do is create a 3D container, just 3D container first, just to get the conversation going. Okay, so we don't need much about this, but just to fix it. Fluids, okay, fluids in Maya, like I said, they're volumetrics, okay, they're not really liquid. You could do semi-liquid like looking things, but it's not, don't expect to be, that's why other softwares exist, RealFlow and Naiad, all those things, okay? So you're not going to do water with this, promise you that. But for fluids to exist, okay, they have to live inside what is called a fluid container. A fluid container is what you can see at the moment. It's just a box, okay? And the fluid simulations are going to happen only inside. Whatever escapes this box is just it's not gonna be calculated. It's not gonna be rendered. It's not gonna be displayed. Nothing, okay? So that's step number 1. Something to remember is that a container is gonna be your, the one thing you need to have in your scene. You can have fluids. You can render fluids without the need of an emitter. Okay, so that's why I'm saying that the minimum requirement to get some sort of fluid is going to have to be a container. Okay, you see what I say? I said fluid. I didn't say fluid simulation. Okay, you can have static fluids, non-dynamic fluids, which are basically volume textures. Okay, with just this. Okay, just with an emitter. If you want to have simulations, of course, you're going to have to probably change the method. We'll cover that in a few weeks. Okay, so for now we have this. Okay, this is my fluid container. Like I said, everything is going to happen in here. And today what I'm going to do is going to go over certain attributes, not all of them. We're going to talk about, to me, what's the most important thing before we jump into fluid simulations is just to kind of really understand how this thing works, and how, what can you do and what you shouldn't be doing with these kind of containers, okay? Being a box, okay, means you have 3 different axes to control, okay? So I'm going to just go to the attribute editor for it. I'm assuming that you already know, you already passed Maya 1, so I'm going to skip certain things, and I'm going to pretend that you already know these things. You're welcome to ask me, but yeah, so just keep that in mind, okay? Things like, for example, the disable evaluation, there's not much to say there, right? You check it on, and this fluid won't be evaluated. We'll deal with that in a minute. So what you can see at the moment is this squares at the bottom, okay? Something to keep in mind here. And that is a representation of the size of the voxels, okay? So, what is a voxel, okay? This cube, okay, this container is split in individual cubes in size. And what I'm going to do for this, and I'm going to take to my display, and I'm going to show you, I can show you the full version, okay, which is this. And as you can probably get, it's a bit messy because, even though there's not many voxels, it's still quite a bit. Is that this cube is subdivided in smaller cubes, okay? Those smaller cubes, okay, they're called voxels, okay? And the voxels are very important for the calculations, okay? Some of these calculations are based on per voxel situation. Data is going to move from voxel to voxel. The more voxels you will have is the more resolution your fluid will have. And that is going to be the one thing that you're going to be battling for quite a bit, is dealing with the voxels, especially dealing with the resolution of a fluid, okay? This is a bit confusing to see, so I'm going to probably draw as a reduced view, which is a bit better, okay? So it kind of tells you what's going on in here, okay? So density, velocities, temperatures, okay, fuel, those things are going to be moving from voxel to voxel in order for a simulation to take place. And things are going to happen, okay? They're voxel dependent. So this is one area that we're going to be, spending a bit of time. What determines the amount of voxels is going to be the resolution of the fluid. Excuse me. So I'm going to go back to the top, and you can see that you have something called the keep the voxel square. Okay, keep voxel square is a pretty handy thing. Before, back in a few years ago, we didn't have that option. Okay, and what happens is that to get the optimal result of a fluid simulation, your voxels should be as square as possible, okay? So we should try to always avoid having some rectangular shapes in there. meaning that the resolution has to, the proportion, okay, the relationship between the number of voxels on each one of the axes has to be, again, for lack of a better word, proportionate to each other. So if I turn this off, okay, keep voxel square, you can see that if I turn it off, the resolution kind of activates, okay? And now you have a size, okay, so you can probably expect what's going to happen, okay, a size of 20, right? And you can see what I was saying here. So here, these voxels are not square. These voxels are going to be a problem for us, okay? Doesn't mean the simulation is not going to happen, you know, it's just not going to calculate correctly because Maya is expecting you to try to work on a, you know, square situation. So before, back in a few years, like I was saying, we didn't have this option. So let's say that you had a container that for some reason, so I was trying to type something and it didn't, okay. It's not letting me, my bad. Okay, let's say that you had this dimension here and then you had this one over there and then this one was probably 3 point, okay, so you had this kind of container. To get the voxel square in this situation was a bit of a pain because you have to find a proportion between these three numbers to be able to have the same number of voxels on each. And that's the way we used to work. Obviously, we probably back then we didn't care too much for this. We try to round these numbers a bit. So in a situation like that, I would have probably round this number to 5, this one to 10, and this one to probably 35 and get something a bit, you know, more manageable to be able to work on. Nowadays, you don't need to have to worry about that. But you can see, my point with this is that you can see what's happening here. So these voxels are not really square at all. And then you can start messing with the resolution, like I was saying. So you could round this thing to 35. You could have round this one to 10. Okay, remember, this just to have for your action to happen inside this box. So you could have worked on something. So let's say that this was like this. So you can say, well, 5 here, 10 in here, and this one will probably, okay, so if it's 7 times, so we will probably have 17 here. We need to work this one out. So, sorry, that's not the way it was. It was 35 times 5. So it's going to get too high in here. You probably multiply this by, you know, by 5, and then you will end up with a number that it will be the right number of voxels in here. I don't want to type it because if you type this number, if you go too high in the resolution, my video card is strong enough to be able to handle it, but it could get a bit annoying, okay? So too slow to show you. What I'm going to do is keep it like this. These voxels are not square, of course, okay? I will have to multiply, okay, 35 by 5 and then put that number in there. But what I'm going to do is turn the keep voxel square. That's what Maya is going to do for me. So if you click in there, and there we go. So these numbers are grayed out, and they're not really. Well, there we go. We're getting some numbers that are working for us. Okay, so Maya's figuring this thing for you. That's something that, in my opinion, you should have that on all the time. I don't see why you wouldn't want to have a square voxel in your simulation. Okay, so that's something to keep an eye on. The base resolution is going to be then applied. If you're using the voxel square, the base resolution is going to be applied to the biggest axis, okay, to the longest axis, and the other two are going to be worked out based on that number. Okay, so that's why you can see that the resolution of 70 is applied to the biggest, the x-axis. Okay, the other two are just worked out automatically after that. So the first thing to remember here, okay, and a very, very important thing, you will hear a question very often. Between your peers and, you know, especially when you're learning, studying these things between your classmates, the first question probably someone will ask about a fluid simulation is, what was your resolution? Okay, that's usually the question number one, because, you know, then you can say, oh, you know, I had a resolution of 400, and they go, oh, that's fantastic. You know, how do you get so many voxels? It tends to happen quite often. Okay, to me. The resolution itself, that number doesn't mean too much, okay? Because what matters to me is the relationship between the base resolution and the size of your container. That to me is what matters. That to me should be the question if you want to be impressed, right? What do I mean by this, okay? For example, I can have a resolution in this case of 70, okay? I could have a resolution of 200, okay? And that to me is not going to mean much because I don't know how big this container is. Okay, I mean, if I'm only asking you what is the base resolution, you tell me 200. I say, oh, cool. I don't know how big this thing. What does it mean? Okay. But if I ask you what is your ratio, for example, and I'm going to be asking you that on the community when I give you reviews and notes on the community, I'll probably be asking you this: so what is your ratio? And I will expect you to probably tell me that ahead of time. Okay, so that's something I want you to get used to it. By ratio, I mean the relationship between the size and the number of voxels. Okay, so to make it round numbers at the moment, probably I'm just going to bring this back to 10, 10, and 10, so we can work a bit faster and a bit easier to deal with this. Okay, you can see that one thing before we dive too deeply into that is the display of the voxels. Big problem. Okay, I never ever display them. I'm only displaying them right now for you because this is the first class and the first session. That's another thing you're gonna probably start doing automatically. Is disabling this display. Okay, so I'm not gonna use reduce. I'm not gonna use bottom. God forbid I turn the full back on because it might crash my Maya. I'm just gonna stay on bounding box for today. Okay, much better. Maya came back to normal. Okay, so here we go. Perfect. So there's still something going on in my machine, probably related to the recording that I'm doing. But the display is definitely gone. So also, why is my Maya a bit slow? I don't know. Obviously it's hard for you to tell if my Maya is slow or not. But right now I'm going to tell you. I'm going to click the Alt key and I'm going to click my left mouse. I'm going to try to move. And it's chugging along. It's very slow. You can see it on the bottom right corner here. You can see my display is 1.6 frames per second, and you can see why there's nothing on the screen, on the scene. Is because of my resolution. Okay, and then let's go back to that conversation then. So that was a resolution. Okay, right now is a resolution of 100. So my Maya will probably be a bit faster. You can see my display is much better. I don't have any density. I don't have any fuel. There's no real simulation. It's still slow. It's just because having those voxels on your screen, on your scene, is definitely going to take a big bite out of your video card. Okay, so for that, I lost my train of thought for a minute, but okay, it's based on the resolution. Okay, so in this case, the relationship between the size and the resolution is 10:1. Yeah, just look at it for a minute. For a size of 10. I'm applying 100 voxels. Okay, so a resolution of 100 is not really that high or that impressive for the let's say that the normal person who will ask you, oh, what's the resolution? The ones that care for the resolution only, 100 you go, well, that's nothing. Well, that's not true. 100 is a lot. Is the size of my container is 10, because my relationship now between those two numbers is 10:1. That is a very high res. That's considered a high res fluid. Okay, in those terms. Because that number that I'm telling you, when you're testing your scene files, when you're doing your practicing at home, you will probably have a relationship of 3:1, 2:1, meaning that you will have a fluid at a resolution of 20 if it's the size of 10. Okay, this is considered a low res. Okay, because it's a 2:1. So anything over 3, 4, 5. Okay, and I'm not telling you the exact numbers you're going to be using. This is just the way I like to think of things. Anything over 3, a 4, a 5:1 is a high res fluid. If you're going really, really high res for cinema or something, you do 10:1, or you do as much as your machine will give you. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. So hopefully that will, and something it's going to take a bit of time to get used to it. Okay, to that concept. But base resolution on its own doesn't mean anything. It means something when you combine it with the size of your container. So if you have a container that is then 100 units. Okay, by 10 by 10. Okay, you're doing something here like this, some sort of fluid that has this shape. A resolution of 20 means you see what happens. As soon as I change to the bigger axis, because that's where the base resolution gets applied to, the other two change, and now it's a resolution of 20 by 3 by 3. This is a very, very low resolution fluid. You can go to 100, as you were before, and in this case, it's not that good either, because you can see this is a 1:1 ratio. So again, you see what I mean by the base resolution 100. In this case, is very low. In my previous case, when the size of the container was 10 by 10 by 10, it was very high. Okay, I'm going to keep stressing on this particular bit very, very much over the course, because to me that is going to be key for the success, okay, of your studies. Understanding this very well. So there you go, base resolution. Again, like I was saying, we're going to hit play, move some fluids around in a minute, but I'm going to go over certain things. You got the boundaries, okay? Boundary X, Y, and Z. As you can see, this is a box. So as the title will tell you, you can have this thing closed, okay? The actual walls of this fluid container closed, or it can be open, or, you know. So for example, in this case, boundary X, when you have it to both sides, it means that it's locked. Okay, this actually has walls, and the fluid will bounce off those walls. There are options to having no boundaries at all, so the fluid will escape. I'm going to show you in a minute, or wrapping, or only on the negative side. We'll talk about it in a second. So for now, I think what I'm going to do is create an emitter. Okay, and as you deal with particles, okay, you can have your particle system and then create an emitter later and connect them. Same thing with fluids. You can create both the emitter and the container at the same time. That's one option. Or you can add an emitter later. And you will see over the weeks that we're going to be emitting fluids out of regular fluid emitters, out of particles, out of geometry, textures. Okay, so they work in a way, the emission, okay, the emission itself, the concept of emission, it works really similar to particles and end particles. Okay, it's just the same kind of techniques. You have a rate, you have a life, you have, well, not really a life, but you do have ways to kill fluids, you know, to decay them and all. So those concepts, that's why I teach fluids second after particles. So what I'll do is, if you want to add an emitter to this, okay, there's the similar scenario. You can go to fluid effects, you can add or edit content, you can add an emitter. If you don't have anything selected, Maya will complain. So it's not like with particles, but you could probably add another emitter and then connect them afterwards. That particular bit, no, but you could have a container and then add the emitter later, but you do have to select it. So fluid effects, add edit content, an emitter, click on that. Let me open my outliner so you can keep an eye on what's going on here. So here we go. If we open that, then you have the emitter, fluid emitter itself, which we'll talk about it later, but it's parented under the fluid. So it is connected to itself, and you can do the connections and disconnections using the regular dynamic relationships. I'm assuming you know this, you know what it is. I'm going to tell you now, I know more. Settings and preferences, the relationship editors, dynamic relationships. That window is very important. I have it here, so important that I have it on my shelf. And here you can do similar connect and disconnect collisions and everything. So the same way the particles work, you can do the same with this. So for what I'm going to do for now is just start moving some fluids so you can see a few of these things that I'm saying. I don't like this kind of long box. There's not much point on that. At least not in that axis. So what I'm going to probably give it is a bit of height. So we can talk about things like buoyancy and things like that. And there we go. Probably it's a bit too skinny. So you can see that by changing just the size in here, then obviously the container will change. The question you will probably have, and you haven't made yet, someone might have, is what's the difference between changing the size here and changing the size here, right? Well, obviously, if you change the size of a fluid within the fluid itself, the whole resolution situation is going to be accounted for. So if you wanted to have a fluid that is 20 by 50 by 20, and you don't do it there, but you do it, okay, so it was 20 by 50 by 20. You just say that you do it here, so it was 2, 5, and 2. Okay. What happens is the box is the same size, but if you go back to your fluid itself, to see the resolution is not the same. Okay, so the resolution will change if you change the values here. So in a way, it's like you're taking a fluid simulation that already took place, or a simulation that exists, and you're stretching it afterwards. So it's going to move. It's just scaling it, making it bigger after the fact. So it's always better, if you need to make the box or the area you're going to be working with bigger, then do it only on inside the container. I personally don't like to scale the containers. That's only like a last resort situation where you already did the simulation, and for some reason you made a mistake and you're shy of like 10 units, or it's a little bit of something. Well, don't tell anybody, then go ahead and scale it. I say don't tell anybody because we don't like to do these things. Someone's going to tell you, you should resimulate that. So be careful when you do it. If you do it, just, be light about it. Don't scale it too much, because you're definitely going to see the difference, okay? So that's why. So I'm going to put this back the way it's supposed to be. And we said then 20 by 50 by, oh. If I hit enter when I was, the mistake that I made, I thought I didn't, for somehow, I didn't click the tab key, and it would have typed that number, okay? It was what, 202,050 or something was going to be. That Maya is going to complain. Maya is going to warn you first, okay? Maya is not going to try to do that because the voxels are going to be so many that the memory is going to go to hell. So Maya, what's going to happen is going to tell you, well, are you sure you want to do this? Because this is going to eat a lot of your memory. And I even think it says Maya probably will crash or something. It says, they're kind of always washing their hands. This is your responsibility if you want to do it. And I think it gives you the option to save your scene before you do that. So keep an eye on that. Okay, so if you go to the size too big because of the base resolution, well, in this case, the base resolution, if I go that big, nothing major is going to happen because it's just the size. So it's going to be actually even worse. It's going to make it smaller. But if you put the numbers of the resolution too high, or you turn this off and you put that number that I'm typing here, you put it in here, Maya is going to definitely complain and kind of warn you what's going to happen. Okay, so be careful there. So there we go. So 20 by 50 by, oh, come on with this tab key, by 20. All right, cool. So now we have the fluid, and the emitter is kind of hidden, not hidden, but it's a bit inconspicuous, is it right here in the middle? It's an omni emitter. So again, from particles, you know this by heart. There's omni emitters, there's volume emitters. So pretty much the same thing you can do with particles as far as emission types go, you can do it here as well. Meaning that you can go into your channel box and then you can change this, for example, to a volume emitter. So this is very familiar to you. Whatever, you can leave it as a cube. And here we go, okay? So you can see that it even has, it's pretty much the same thing. It even has the same access to, push the fluid around like you do with particles, so everything's normal. Well, the default test where everybody does will be here. The emitter itself, okay, you can scale it with no problem. That does, I think there is, it's weird, nothing came up, but I think there's a question. Does anybody have Ellie, what's up? Okay, good question. So I don't know, hopefully this can be seen in the recording, but if the question is, when I receive a set that is in real scale and you want to add the fluids to it, do you just resize it? Yes, depends. If you're working at home, let's say you're freelancing and you control your decisions, yes, I will definitely, if it's my way, I will scale the set down. No problem. Scale everything down to bring it into range, okay? If you're in a big studio, then they have these fancy fluid tools and, other fluid solvers. Somehow, maybe there's no need to scale it down if it's too crazy, because the idea of a fluid simulation, let's say that you have a city block, okay? In the Avengers, and you have to blow it up and lots of stuff happens, you've seen those movies before. You're never, ever, ever going to have one big container for everything happening there. That's not going to happen. You're going to have obviously multiple small fluid simulations everywhere that they get combined in render time and the whole shebang, right? But it is a possibility. We'll explore that during the course because you have to play with the balance, okay, of things. I don't really want to have, for example, a fluid box. Given the whole speech that I just gave you about the whole base resolution, right? I wouldn't want to try to work with that logic, okay? You will think, well, do I want to work then only with 10 containers and try to scale everything so tiny to fit it in there so I can shove 200 voxels in there? And, well, it's a balance, okay? You shouldn't go from one extreme or the other, because if it's too small, then the dynamics within the fluid are going to behave. It's a matter of scale, right? So if you scale everything too small, then the fluid is going to feel a bit small. You're going to have to tweak so many things to make the fluid move slower that it could get a bit complicated. So you try to work within reason, okay? So if it's a massive set, of course it's impossible. You're going to barely fit a container around what you need with a resolution of 1:1. Then of course you're going to have to be creative and either scale it down or subdivide it into multiple simulations. And it's tricky. That's part of what I'm going to go the next class probably is just on your first assignment is to deal with this kind of things. Okay, so if you have objects traveling across the scene, how do you do that? How do you travel from one container to another, or how do you deal with this kind of situation? So it's coming. We have ways, okay, of upresting simulations after the fact. Okay, Maya is going to have a limit, and probably not so much Maya, but your computer is going to have a limit on how far you can push these things. So is knowing that limit as well is what's going to tell you, well, my computer can handle it and it can happen overnight, and I won't see the computer working, so why not do it in a real scale? It depends, okay? It's a bit of a playing game in there. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, just keep typing in there and I'll keep an eye on you, okay? Excellent, no worries. Okay, so well, let's go ahead and get some fluids moving in here. So I'm going to scale this emitter a little. It's not really necessary, but I just want to show you what's happening also in the emitter a little bit. Okay. If you have something like this, and you've probably seen that before, you've probably done it at home already. If you hit play, you're going to get something going on, okay? This white blob is rising, okay, fine. You've seen this many times before. There's a lot of things going on in this box, okay? And we're going to go over a few. So, first thing is still in the container, okay? We're kind of seeing a bit of the boundaries. I'm going to leave them as they are so I can show you once this fluid starts to move really, you will see the walls and the whole thing, and then we'll talk about it a bit more. But for now, what you need to keep an eye on your contents method, okay? And this is going to dictate which areas of this fluid are going to be simulated, if any. What I mean, if any, is because, like I was saying before, you could have a static fluid look like something, and that's something that we're going to do probably in like 3 weeks or so. So for now, anything that says dynamic grid, okay, means that it's going to be simulated. And the minimum you need for an actual volumetric simulation is going to be density and velocity, okay? So these two guys in here. Like I said, dynamic grid means it's being calculated. If you click on this, you can see, of course, you can turn the channel off. You can set it to a static grid, which is what I was saying about the fluids that are not really simulated. Dynamic is what we have, and a gradient is another way of texturing a fluid box. Okay, I'm going to leave it at dynamic. Like I said, dynamic for density and for velocity. If you're missing one of these two, then you don't see, there's nothing going on. Okay, and that's basically as it is right now. So that's what you get this kind of situation. If you jump back to the emitter itself, okay, which is something a bit ironic to me, because if the default behavior of a fluid box is having, I'm going to go back to it so you can see, is having temperature in fuel set to off, the emitter itself, the default behavior is still emitting fuel and temperature. So it's a bit kind of lame. So if you're only using density and velocity, what you should be doing is taking the heat method, okay, because heat is the temperature. It could have probably be called temperature as well. The heat method, and set it to no emission. Yeah, the tendency is, well, but if it's not being calculated, what's the point? I like to keep things clean because it's less confusion later on for you guys. So if there's no temperature being calculated, then don't emit it. What's the point? Same thing with the fuel. Turn that off. It's better to be off than to be on. Okay, there's less things to worry about, because I can see that if you're new to this and you leave the heat turned on, and you be like, oh, you start messing with a number, you spend 30 minutes playing with it and thinking that something looks slightly different, and it's not true. So turn that off so you don't have to worry about it. As with particles, this is going to be your rate. Okay, so the density per voxel per second is the amount of density that is getting emitted on every second, of course. The higher the number, as you can imagine, the more density you will emit. And this is where the whole fluid dynamic thing starts to take place. The more density you have, okay, the faster this fluid is going to move, or at least the faster it's going to rise in this specific situation. The reason why this fluid is a bit weak, and you can see that it took 94 frames to barely climb anything, is because there's a lot of forces going on. There's something, I'm going to cover them now. Something called buoyancy. There is a dissipation. There is also, there's many factors taking place here. But at the end of the day, if I were to put more density, which I'm going to do right now, let's say instead of 1, we set it to 10, and we rewind and hit play, then you automatically will get something a bit more dynamic, okay? So density is very, very important for your simulations, of course. You need to have density in order for these things to work. So you can see that with the more density, this thing is actually moving a lot more. Something to keep in mind. Another thing is the default behavior of a fluid emitter is to have the fluid drop-off set to 2. Okay, and the fluid drop-off I always associate it with the attenuation of a field. Okay, or Maya dynamics field. So meaning that from the center out is going to weaken. Okay, it's going to fade based on this number. And 2 is this is a very sensitive number. The whole fluid drop-off situation. It's very, very strong. So if I just hit frame, play one frame, probably you will see, okay? So you can see a gradient going on from the center out. And that's based on this number. Depends on what you're doing. If that's something, that's the look you're going for, fine. If you really want to have this box emit everything it can emit, just put it to 0. Okay, so we're going to rewind and hit play one more frame. And you can see the difference, okay? So think of it, the easiest way to think of it as the attenuation of your field. One thing to remind people, I'm going to do it only in this class, is just try not to follow along with me in Maya at the moment. Try to focus on the class, try to pay attention to what I'm saying, and come up with cool questions. And then when you watch the recording, you can just practice along with me. Because if you are, trying to follow, keep up, you might miss something. I don't know. It seems a bit more, now that you have the recordings, and my students can vouch for this, but this is the first time it's happening. That you're going to get recordings after the class takes place, then there's not much point of trying to keep up in Maya and do what I'm doing. Just a little heads up. So there we go. Here it is. So this is the full blast of the fluid emitter. Of course, now it means there is a lot more density, so we get a lot more motion. And take a look at what's happening on the walls. Okay, so I'm going to let it climb all the way up. There's lots and lots of density. As you can see, this is very thick. For those of you with the curiosity, yes, you can render this. You can hit render, and that's what's coming through right now from Maya software. This can be rendered with Maya software, with Mentoray, Renderman, pretty much anything you want to use. Here it is. If you look at the alpha channel, of course, it's bright white. It's super solid because there's lots and lots of density going on in here. But anyway, I'm going to let it run, and you will see that it will reach the top. Well, we run out of frames right at the beginning of my right time. So let's give ourselves a bit more frames. Let it play one more time. This fluid, well, it might be hard to see it because it's so dense, but it's bouncing off the walls. All the walls, for that matter. So there we go. Okay, so at some point this thing is going to be so full because the density is not escaping the container, and the density at the moment, the default behavior is not to dissipate. We'll talk about it later, a bit later. But here we go. To make things a bit clearer for you to see, I'm going to reduce this back to 1 because I changed the fluid drop-off. That's not what it made. Made a big difference in the amount of density. So now that it's back to 1, it's still moving a bit slower, but it will give you a better idea of what's happening in here. Again, you could, just by seeing this, you could think, well, but how do I know it's bouncing and not escaping? It could look, by the look of it, it could be the same thing. And what I will tell you to do is just to select the container and go back to the display tab, okay, where we were before, where you could see the bounding box, sorry, the reduce and the voxels themselves. If you scroll down here, you can see the velocity draw. You click on it, okay, and this is going to show you the the velocity is happening inside this container. This is a very, very handy debug mode, okay, for us. At the end of the day, when you have fluid simulations, the 90% of the fluid simulations you want them to have swirl, you want it to be, to spin in, have eddies and, be very interesting motion. And it could be tricky sometimes to know what's happening really in this container. So by showing the velocities like this, it kind of tells you a little bit. And here you can see a bit better that this fluid is actually indeed colliding with the walls, okay? Okay, you see the vectors pointing down, even though the fluid is moving up. These vectors are pointing out, so it kind of is telling you, well, this fluid is definitely spinning in here, so there's a lot of motion going on. I'll let you play with this yourself, but you can skip. Sometimes you want to skip a few because it's too many vectors, and probably draw them a bit longer so you get a better idea. If you drag like this, you can kind of see where this fluid is going on, what it's doing. So, very interesting thing to do there. And that is with the boundaries closed. That's what I was going to say. So if you go back to the top, usually, let's say that you try to do a little steam. Okay, that's going to be like the first test. Not test. I like to call them tests. It's the first assignment. It's just like I like to do what I'm going to do for these courses is First week, today, week 1, a simple light assignment just to get you used to the community. That's the most important thing. Some of you already took courses with me, so you know. But the community is the place to be. That's what you're going to be posting your videos or your play blasts and your renders, and that is when I'm going to give comments from now on. So I'm going to do my absolute best to visit it every day as long as I can and try to answer as many questions as possible. So the assignments this first week are going to be a bit soft. Okay, so we're going to do what I want you guys to do is a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and try to do the steam of that cup of coffee. You might be sitting at home thinking, well, that is so stupid, that is so simple. I dare you, try it. It is really tricky. Some of my students from other levels, which you will see on the community, they can answer this for you. It sounds like it's the simplest of things, and it's really tricky to do something as simple as steam coming off a cup of coffee. It can take some time. Just not only the rendering side, but just the motion itself and the scale of it is going to be tricky. So that is the assignment for this week. Anyway, we'll talk about it at the end. So let's say we're doing something like that, okay? So we're going to try to do a little bit of steam somewhere here. We're not going to have enough time today to cover all the topics of, obviously, of fluid motion. I'm going to give you a few hints, and this is going to take some time. But the first thing you should try to do is obviously open these boundaries. You don't really want this density to be bouncing around and getting denser and denser and denser as time goes by. So the decision has to be, well, do I care for the boundaries, or which boundaries do I care for? I don't want anything on the x-axis. I'm just going to leave that to none. And what's going to happen is that this density is going to escape. Now, if we go back to the display section that we had here, the velocity draw, if the density escapes, okay, this is going to translate into other things. It's not just the density escaping, it's these vectors here are not going to be doing that. So that's probably going to lose some detail in the motion, okay? So that's something you have to be aware of. That's what having the display of arrows, the velocity vectors, is very important. Because as soon as you open these boundaries, this fluid is not going to have this motion here, which could translate into something interesting later on. So it's something to keep in mind. I don't care for the boundary in X, and I don't really care for the boundary in Z either. Okay, so I'm opening those two. Let's say that this is the bottom of your cup of coffee. Or you're not doing a cup of coffee, you're doing something else, a steam vent from New York City or something. Okay, whatever it is you're doing. Try to always, okay, that's another tip. Try to always use the bottom of the container itself as your floor as much as possible. So any explosion, anything that's happening on a flat surface, on a flat floor, or as flat as you can get it to be, try to use the actual bottom boundary of your container as opposed to using a collision with an object, because the collision is going to it's a bit more problematic, it's a bit slower, and to me, in my opinion, is tends to eat density away. It's really weird. I avoid collisions as much as I can, and it's always cheaper, of course, to have the bottom of the container that is already built in, is already easy to calculate as a floor anyway. So if I had to put this on top of a flat floor, and I wouldn't make a polyplane and do a collision, there's no point in doing that. So you will see most of the fluids that you will do, they will have the boundary in Y set to the negative Y side usually. Okay, so that's just the floor. So that means that you will still get some sort of little collision down here, but when it reaches the top, the density is going to escape. So let's turn this back off. And let's go ahead and hit play. Because the emitter is always pushing density away, I'm also going to open myself. I don't know why I'm having so little frames. They're free. There you go. So now we have more room to talk and can let this thing run. You can see that the motion is already different. But what I was going to tell you is that, this is not going to dissipate or disappear on its own, because the emitter is always pumping density out. Okay, this is going to look a certain way if I let it play, but at the moment there is nothing controlling the way that this density is not disappearing. It's like having particles that live forever. Okay, the only reason this fluid is dying in certain areas is because it's escaping the box. But the fluid itself, okay, in these regions here, or the density at the bottom and the density at the very top is exactly the same at the moment. So like I was saying, it's like having particles that live forever. That could work for some cases, but for most of them it doesn't work. how do you determine, okay, how this fluid will behave, and how will, at least how do you control the rate of this density disappearing, or what we call, the way it's called in Maya fluids is dissipation, okay? Is by scrolling down, okay? And I'm going to be jumping a bit from the top to the bottom on this, because there's no real benefit of me going from the top to the bottom slowly one at a time, because these attributes are spread all over the place. So I'm going to be covering everything, promise you, but I'm going to be moving a little bit from place to place. We know what the emitter does. Okay, we know at the moment that all I care for is this, the emission of density. I turned the other things off, and the fluid drop off. So I'm done with that part for now. So I'm going to be working on my emitter. I already opened my boundaries. We have a resolution. Okay, let's jump back to that in a minute. Let's see. Base resolution of 100. This means that I have a resolution or a ratio of 2 to 1. And we know, we're starting to get to know that this is considered a low resolution fluid for now. It's moving really well. If I rewind and hit play, let's see what kind of display we get. Okay, 12, 13 frames per second. That's not bad at all. Okay. Be prepared. For those of you who haven't done any fluids yet, be prepared, because the time will come when you will see fluid simulations running overnight. And I've seen that before. Students get frustrated and they get angry sometimes. But why is this so slow? And well, that's the way it is. When we're working on film and stuff, we tend to run multiple simulations simultaneously. You know, we obviously have access to render farms and things like that, so we have a few more tools, of course. But we tend to run multiple simulations. We are very creative on when we run these things, so we tend to work on simulations during the morning. Before lunch, we launch a play blast or a cache. We never leave the studio without having something on the farm running overnight, because that is our chance to run probably a full simulation for dailies in the morning. That is the mindset is going to change a little. It's not like particles where you get them on the screen relatively quick and you're done. You have to plan ahead your day. So I'm going to be simulating this and that, and you have multiple Mayas open at the same time, multiple shots running. It's time management, which is a different subject. But be prepared, because it's going to get slow. Let me just quickly check. Okay, so I need to start wrapping things up. I don't want to go over because I have another class coming. But before I go, of course, I'm not gonna leave you hanging. So I'm just gonna scroll down, like I was saying, and I'm gonna go to the content details. Okay, you have a dynamic simulation tab, which we're gonna talk about it later. You can see you have gravity, viscosity, friction. You have a lot of things here that we're gonna talk about it with time. There's many attributes to see on fluids, so this is gonna take a while. But the thing that I wanted to show you or talk about was the dissipation. Remember, the ability of this density to disappear or slowly decay over time, okay? Which is not happening at the moment. So that is located under the content details and the density tab. Okay, you can see here density, velocity, turbulence, fuel. Okay, so these things match this section on the top, where the things that you're actually calculating: density, velocity, temperature, fuel. Okay, so these things are very similar to what you have down here. Density, velocity, okay? So I know that because density is what I care for at the moment. I open it up and you have a few things. Buoyancy, diffusion, pressure, noise, a lot of stuff. For now, okay, two things I want to talk to you about before I go. One is the dissipation, okay? And like I said, this is the ability of this fluid to decay and, dissipate. By default is 0, which means what's happening at the moment. If I set that to any number, I'm going to start with 1, for example, the behavior is going to be different. So it's like giving a particle a lifespan. Eventually, this particle gets older and older and older, and then there's no more particle anymore. Same thing is going to happen here. Depends on how strong my dissipation is. Okay, you're going to see a different result. So here we go. It's doing something definitely different to what we had. And you can already see the gradient going on. This is not steam. This looks like a weird ghost to me. I don't know. Looks kind of weird. But there you go. You can see that it's a lot of density at the bottom, not much density at the top, and to the point there's no more density at all. And that's based on the dissipation. Something to keep in mind, very important. The dissipation and the buoyancy and a lot of these attributes, okay, for now I'm talking about dissipation. For dissipation is dependent of the amount of voxels that you have. So let's say, and this is something that, again, part of the mindset that you need to adopt from now on. let's say that you're working on a ratio of 2 to 1, as we are right now. We know that's considered low resolution. What does it mean? It means that at some point I'm going to have to increase my resolution when I'm going to render this thing, because it's not going to look right. If I render this at the moment, if you hit render here, then you get that. Okay, that is not really quality for effects, and it's not really quality for film. That is okay for you to start setting your container and getting your things going. So this means that you have to have some sort of idea in your mind at the beginning, saying, well, I'm working on a 2 to 1, but I think this fluid is going to need at least a 4 to 1 or a 5 to 1 or a 6 to 1 for this thing to look anything good. The resolution, like I said, it will definitely make it look better, but it's not the only way to make a fluid look good. Okay, there's other techniques, but the first place you look is for the resolution. So if you're expecting this fluid to have 3 or 4 or 5 times more voxels than you originally are using for testing, this means that your dissipation is going to change as well, because the dissipation is on a per voxel basis. So it's a change from voxel to voxel. Okay, so let's say that you have in this container, I'm not looking up there, so I don't know, but let's say that you have 1 million voxels, okay, going on, and your final resolution is going to have 5 million voxels. Obviously, your density is traveling through 5 times more voxels than before, meaning that your dissipation is going to be a lot stronger. I might be making a mistake by saying it's going to be 5 times stronger, so I'm not going to say that. I think a little bit in those terms, but I know it's going to be a lot stronger. So what is going to happen? Well, you need to be aware that the moment you increase your resolution, you're going to have to decrease your dissipation to kind of maintain the same ratio. And that is, I don't see it as a flaw. I see it as the way it is, and I'm used to it, and I actually welcome it. But people tend to complain, well, but the fluid and low res, and I wish I could just up-res it and it will behave the same and look much better. Well, we all do, but that's not the way it is. It's being aware of the why or how this fluid works. And you see, today we haven't done really anything impressive, but it's a lot of me talking. But I don't think you find a lot of these things easy on other tutorials. So you spend some time thinking of those terms. Okay, so then if you're expecting resolution to double or triple, keep an eye, and then probably you're going to have to cut it in half or a third. Your dissipation going to maintain a rate. Okay. For now, because I'm running out of time, we're going to leave it as it is. This week, like I said, is a bit soft, and probably the next week is also going to be this level in particular ramps up a bit slow. But I promise you that in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, you're going to be doing already some airbender fire trails, and we're going to get quickly. It's just the base, the start is a bit slow. Okay, I want you to get this thing. So play with fluids. If you already have some experience in what I told you today, you already knew it. Go in and try to play a little bit. Find a model of a cup and then see if you can set your fluid in there. Get used to the scaling. Right now, we only talked about dissipation, which is this, but I'm gonna give you a hint, and next week we'll obviously cover it correctly. But the buoyancy is the ability of this fluid to rise. The higher the buoyancy, the faster this fluid is gonna rise. Okay, but also I showed you earlier that the more density that you output also translates into this fluid moving faster. So it's something you have to balance those two numbers. Okay, I'm not gonna text it because I honestly have to run to my next class, and I wanna do a little Q&A with you. But this week, just try to find a model of a cup. And see, and you're not gonna, if you don't know any fluids and you're following really what I'm saying, you're not gonna get any steam-looking wonderful things to get, but we're gonna get there next week for sure. Sorry, I need to go back here. Big group. So I think what we can do is, because I don't want to go one by one, is whoever has a question, you can type it on the chat window, or I will prefer if you ask me directly. Okay, well, excellent. What is considered low, normal, and high relationship between resolution and the size? Well, I'll tell you my version of the deal. Like I was saying, a 2 to 1 is, I think of it as low. 3 to 1 is getting still low, but it's a bit nicer. When you go for film and real deal, you go as far as your computer will get you. So it's hard to say. Sometimes it's 10 to 1, 15 to 1. Sometimes you cannot go that high, so you have to apply wavelet turbulences and things like that, or other techniques to up-res it. Depends on your machine and how much time you have. Okay, try not to work on a fluid that is too low res, because what I just told you, when you up-res it to a real resolution, you're gonna have to change so many numbers again that you might as well do it over. So you have to kind of find a balance of, how much time are you willing to wait. I'm going to teach you, my goal, and I have accomplished that in the previous levels, is to teach you to deal with these fluids almost without even looking at them. Just I don't like to play blast fluids. It takes too long. I tend to just go straight to caching or even straight to rendering. Look at the render, the result that I have, and based on that, I can assess what's wrong with it and what can I change. So my objective is to teach you to think that way, and it will save you a lot of time. That way you can work on fluids that are a bit higher resolution and skip a lot of the middle parts. So yeah, it's going to take a bit of practice. So don't get too hung up on 3:1, 4:1. It's just know that 2 or 3:1 is not really high. 5 over is a good resolution. So it's somewhere there. We'll figure it out together. How about everyone else? I see Victor has a couple of questions. How about everybody is okay? How about you, Mario, Inyo, Ellie, Nathaniel, Dario? Oh, Dario's here. Good. Claude, of course. What does the density of voxels per second mean? What is it called like that? Well, remember what I said, that the density is like, okay, with particles, it's going to be particles per second. Okay. So here's going to be density per second, but it's also related to the amount of voxels. Remember that I was saying that the same thing that happens with the dissipation. Having more voxels is going to mean that you're going to have more density as well. So why do they call it density? Well, the density over second, okay, you know that one. The inclusion of the voxels in there depends. It's also depending, for example, the size of your emitter. Okay, your emitter is going to be sitting inside your container. I'm going to quickly go back to Maya. Okay, so this emitter here, I'm going to rewind so you can see it better. Okay, this emitter here is emitting density every second, but it's also, because it's sitting inside the container, it's sitting inside the voxel. So if I were to put this back to, let's see, we'll put that to even reduce this quite a bit. Okay, but I'll give you an idea. So this container, sorry, this emitter is sitting in here. So it has a lot of voxels that are overlapping with it. So the density is going to be based on the time and how many voxels this thing is touching. So it could be wrong, but that is probably the logic behind that concept. Okay. Claude, you're good. Mario, you're good. Dario, you say hello. How are you? I'm glad you made it. Any other questions, guys? Ellie? I think Ellie, you said you were okay. Ellie's always okay. Ellie never has a problem. There we go. That's great. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I think everybody's happy. Okay, cool. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for the ones watching the video. So see you next week.